to Srimad Nitya Leela Pravista, His Divine Grace, ISKCON's BBD founder, Chaya Jagadguru, Patita Pavana, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Mata Koti Vaishnava Binda Ki Jai, Rantaraj, Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Rantaraj, Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai, Moksha Kadasi Gita Jayanti Ki Jai, Shri Radha Govinda Ki Jai, Nitai Gaur Premanandi, Haribol. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanandi, Haribol. Hare Krishna. That's right. No droop or palsy here, man. This Jayadvaita Maharaj, who first enunciated to me the art and, practical necessity of having a proper wire on a microphone. And that has been fixed in my mind for the last 47 years, that instruction. So today is Advent of Bhagavad Gita. Advent means the appearance. So, as we will hear from a very wonderful verse and purport, Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 15, the Pandavas Retire Timely, text number 27, Srila Prabhupada will describe the glories of Bhagavad Gita, especially for us in this time that we're living in, and also give a very succinct and sublime summary of the Bhagavad Gita. But to make a note here as a preamble before we get started, that Krishna, he is speaking the Bhagavad Gita, as we read this morning in the after the Mangal Arti, that anyone in all circumstances and situations can consult Bhagavad Gita to get relief and answers, and also to save one even in the most critical and darkest situation. So that is Krishna himself, that is the Srimad Bhagavatam, that is Bhagavad Gita, that is especially in this Kali Yuga, the holy name of the Lord. So it is always very interesting and sublime and pleasurable to see how the Lord appears in his various ways, the circumstances, the situation. We have Srila Prabhupada Leela Amrita, the nectarian, the immortal nectarian pastimes of Srila Prabhupada, the pure devotee of Krishna. How seemingly Srila Prabhupada exhibited a life, quote unquote, like an ordinary person. Sometimes critics of this great literature say that Srila Prabhupada was portrayed in this way. But in the words of the author, Satsvarup Das Goswami, the real life story and struggle of Srila Prabhupada to overcome all the odds and obstacles of this material nature to triumph as he is, we all understand, the appointed Shakyavesh avatar, the chosen pure devotee of the Lord, sent from the spiritual world, but showing us an example how we can live our life also and ultimately become greatly successful by the grace and mercy of Srila Prabhupada and the Guru Parampara. So, and the second part of the class or presentation I would like to bring forth is how Srila Prabhupada, throughout his entire life, and especially after his spiritual master departed in 1936, which we will observe next Wednesday on the 18th, the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, that he was always referring to Bhagavad Gita. And he even wrote, as we will hear, an entire 1,200-page Bhagavad Gita, English Bhagavad Gita with full, as we see in Prabhupada's books today, Sanskrit, word-for-word translation, etc., etc. But somehow, and it's a mystery still to this day, the manuscript was stolen. And then later, Srila Prabhupada, he translated and made Bhagavad Gita here in New York City. When Prabhupada was living in his own room at 307, not in the yoga studio, but his own apartment room, 307 West 72nd Street, 1 block from Central Park, he recorded one of Mishra's students at Ananda Ashram had donated to Srila Prabhupada a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Has anyone ever seen, or what to speak of, used a reel-to-reel tape recorder? It's something for anybody under the age of 40, like something from the dinosaur age. But it was a great luxury. And ultimately, that was stolen from that very apartment, and that caused Prabhupada to lose his enthusiasm for staying up there. And at the same time, he had invitations to come downtown. One of the first, actually, he was a maybe not so much a student, but like kind of a passerby at the Ananda Ashram and Mishra's Place in New York City. Harvey Cohn met Prabhupada in January of 1966, way before Mukunda, Brahmananda, Satsvarup, etc., 6 months later. And he donated or allowed or invited Prabhupada to come live in his Bowery Artist in Resident loft. So Prabhupada, in the late winter, Prabhupada moved in mid-February to this apartment and had this donated reel-to-reel tape recorder. That's, if you look on the bhajans of Srila Prabhupada, he's chanting the prayers to Queen Kunti. He's chanting Shukadeva Goswami's invocation prayers to Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the beginning of the 4th chapter of the 2nd canto. Maybe everybody, or somebody can come from behind and twist me more this way, because I'm getting a crick in my neck looking at you, and, come a little more. Thank you. So Prabhupada recorded, and we can listen to the entire introduction to the Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada was meditating on Bhagavad Gita throughout his entire stay, and his ultimate, his first mission was to get the Bhagavad Gita, his own Bhagavad Gita, translated into English, and of course that ultimately miraculously happened, which we will also hope to describe. That is the account of His Grace Brahmananda Prabhu. So, Arjuna was sent by the fairly newly installed Maharaj Yudhishthir after the Battle of Kurukshetra was won and everything was settled up, to find out from Krishna. Krishna helped everything. The Battle of Kurukshetra is in Uttar Pradesh, near Hastinapur. So where is Krishna's place? Dwarka, all the way on the west side of India, Gujarat. That's Krishna's place. So Arjuna had gone there, and Maharaj Yudhishthira is waiting for news. What is going on with Krishna? What is his next activity? What is his next program of work? How is everybody doing? And of course, Arjuna came and reported to Maharaj Yudhishthira that the Lord had disappeared. And hence, they immediately made the decision to retire from all family life, and they went to the Himalayan mountains, and they departed this planet. So in the great grief and lamentation of Arjuna describing the disappearance of the Lord to Maharaj Yudhishthira, this verse he now speaks. This is verse number 27 of this chapter. The Pandavas retire timely. Desha, Kala, Artha, Yuktani, Rit, Tapa, Basamani, Cha, Haranti, Smarata, Chitam, Govinda, Abhihitani, Me, Desha Kalarta Yuktani, Ritopapasamani cha Aranti smaratas chitam Govinda bi hitani me Desha kalarta yuktani Ritapo Ritapo pasamani cha Aranti smaratas chitam Govinda bihitani me Desha kalarta yuktani Ritaposa amanicha Aranti smartas chitam Govinda bihitani me. Any ladies? Desha, space, kala, time, artha, importance, yuktani, impregnated, impregnated with, rit, the heart, tapa, burning, upasamani, extinguishing, cha, and, haranti, are attracting, smarata, by remembering, chitam, mind, Govinda, listen carefully, the supreme personality of pleasure. Pretty cool, huh? Abhitani, narrated by, me, unto me. Remember that, Govinda, the supreme personality of pleasure. Now I am attracted to those instructions imparted to me by the personality of Godhead, Govinda, because they are impregnated with instructions for relieving the burning heart in all circumstances of time and space. Let us all experience the joy of saying this together. Now I am attracted to those instructions imparted to me by the personality of Godhead, Govinda, because they are impregnated with instructions for relieving the burning heart in all circumstances of time and space. I'd like to inject something before we read the purport. O Govinda, I shall not fight. And Krishna, and Arjuna is addressing Krishna as Govinda several times throughout the Bhagavad Gita, and especially in the beginning where he's giving what he thinks to be his very good, sound, moral, and logical and reasonable reasons why he should not fight. Srila Prabhupada in the Chaitanya Charitamrita is describing how the devotee approaches Krishna in three stages. And there are three functional deities, three deities that are in charge of the functions of each of these stages. That is Radha Madan Mohan, who is in charge of Sambandha, Sambandha, reestablishing our lost relationship with Krishna, overcoming material desires and lust. Madan Mohan is the deity in charge. Then, when one is established, understanding that one is the eternal servant of the Lord and one's life is dedicated to pleasing the Lord in devotional service through proper activity as guided by the bona fide spiritual master, that deity in charge is Radha Govinda, Sri Govinda Dev. So here is confirmation when it's all, again, he's attracted to the instructions of the Lord given to him on that battlefield of Kurukshetra, the Bhagavad Gita, Govinda. You always keep that in mind. Govinda is the giver and instructor of the Bhagavad Gita, what to speak of so many other things. And because Bhagavad Gita is the most important literature to be distributed to the fallen conditioned souls, as we'll hear in this purport, the Lord has made it simplified, the entire gamut of the Vedic literature. Everything is in Bhagavad Gita so nicely. So Prabhupada very much wanted the Bhagavad Gita to be published in all languages of the world and distributed in mass. And if somebody could come up with a statistic, how many Bhagavad Gitas have been distributed since 1965 or 6 till date, that would be a nice number to read out. Purport. Herein, Arjuna refers to the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita, which were imparted to him by the Lord on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Arjuna says also in this section that this knowledge was imparted to me in the great intimacy of friendship also. The Lord left behind him the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita, not for the benefit of Arjuna alone, but also for all time and in all lands. Prabhupada gives the example that the mother-in-law teaches the new daughter-in-law in the house by instructing her own daughter, who of course knows the instructions very well, but to not, to help the new daughter-in-law become amalgamated comfortably into the house, not feel ashamed, embarrassed, or, that not to give her the instruction right away. So in the same way, Arjuna did not come under the illusion he's a fully self-realized soul, but seemingly he's coming under this bewilderment for the sake that the instruction of the Lord can be imparted to Arjuna, and Arjuna is representing everyone. In a similar way, Maharaj Parikshit, becoming angry when he was seemingly refused water, when he was tired and thirsty, set the stage for the book incarnation of the Lord in full manifestation, the Srimad Bhagavatam, to be revealed to the world. So we should always keep that in mind. Prabhupada has said that a devotee is expert in turning a seeming disadvantage into an advantage. Not for the benefit of Arjuna alone, but also for all time and in all lands. The Bhagavad Gita, being spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the essence of all Vedic wisdom. And we will touch, Prabhupada put at the end of his introduction, the Gita Mahatmya verses. A similar thing is being said here, that the Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all Vedic wisdom. It is nicely presented by the Lord himself for all who have very little time to go through the vast Vedic literatures like the Upanishads, Puranas, and Vedanta Sutra. It is put within the study of the great historical epic Mahabharata, which was especially prepared for the less intelligent class, namely the women, the laborers, and those who are worthless descendants of the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and higher sections of the Vaishyas. So, of course, we keep in mind this is Prabhupada's mood, understanding, and instruction that when we take to devotional life, it doesn't matter who we are or what we are, this gender, male, female, this place, that place. we transcend all of these designations. So we should understand Manushanam Sahasre Shu to actually be a fully dedicated devotee in sadhana throughout one's entire life, compared to the, how many people are on the planet now? 8 billion, 9 billion, something. Huge number, very small minority. So being a devotee properly situated is very, very rare and very, very special. The problem which arose in the heart of Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra was solved by the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. Again, after the departure of the Lord from the vision of earthly people, when Arjuna was face to face with being vanquished in his acquired power and prominence, he wanted again to remember the great teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, just to teach all concerned that the Bhagavad Gita can be consulted in all critical times, not only for solace from all kinds of mental agonies, but also for the way out of great entanglements which may embarrass one in some critical hour. So let's keep in mind, this corresponds to the first canto, part 3, as Srila Prabhupada translated and with great difficulty and personal struggle published. Actually, the volume 1, part 1, was the biggest difficulty, and the success from that, and the noticing, the acknowledgement from the scholarly community in India, and Giriraj Swami and others commenting, because they came back to India with Srila Prabhupada in 1970. It's a misnomer to think that Prabhupada was unsuccessful in his preaching in India. Seemingly nothing really happened, but Prabhupada was following the mood or the lead of his spiritual master, trying to talk to the leading men of society, politicians, industrialists, scholars, professors, the leading persons. This is Krishna's instruction also. Whatever the leading men of society do, everyone will follow. You see how Prabhupada, in his first meeting with John Lennon and Yoko Ono and George Harrison in Tittenhurst in London in 1969, you are all leaders. People follow you. They like you. So if you accept Krishna consciousness, then it will be a great benefit for the entire world. So then the money came to print volume 2 and then to print volume 3. So Prabhupada was that much closer. This is 1964 that this is being written and published. Yadubara and Vishaka included this in the movie about Srila Prabhupada. What is it? Hare Krishna. The Mantra, the Movement, and the Swami Who Started It All. Came out in 2017. We had a grand, opening night in the East Village Cinemas on 2nd Avenue and 11th Street. Took over the whole theater. It's an old theater, like 100 or 120 years old, Art Deco architecture. A gala event. So I don't know where this came from, but they put in there, the actor simulating Srila Prabhupada, that when I completed the 3rd volume, then Guru Maharaj said, now you can go to America. This is enough, just the first canto. And Prabhupada, he would tell his devotees, the first devotees who came, I put everything into this first canto. This first canto is enough for you to go back home, back to Godhead, just by this 3 volumes. It can be consulted in all critical times, not only for solace from all kinds of mental agonies, but also for the way out of great entanglements which may embarrass one in some critical hour. The merciful Lord left behind him the great teachings of the Bhagavad Gita so that one could take the instructions of the Lord even when he is not visible to material eyesight. We were saying in some recent classes that I gave that the Lord is coming once in the day of Brahma, which to our calculation is billions of years. But from the Lord's version, it's just like if a mother or father, their child is abducted or lost, they will come every single day to the police station and check with the authorities. Is there any progress been made? So the Lord is coming every single day of Lord Brahma, who is the chief of this universe and all universes. Material senses cannot have any estimation of the Supreme Lord, but by his inconceivable power, the Lord can incarnate himself to the sense perception of the conditioned souls in a suitable manner through the agency of matter, which is also another form of the Lord's manifested energy. Thus, the Bhagavad Gita, or any authentic scriptural sound representation of the Lord, is also the incarnation of the Lord. Who has experienced their first understanding of Krishna consciousness, that there's a movement, anything, was through the Bhagavad Gita or one of Srila Prabhupada's books? Can raise their hand. And was it like more powerful than anything else you would ever, was it like the epiphany, this is it, eureka, I found it? That was my experience. There is no difference between the sound representation of the Lord and the Lord himself. One can derive the same benefit from the Bhagavad Gita as Arjuna did in the personal presence of the Lord. Let's say that again. One can derive the same benefit from the Bhagavad Gita as Arjuna did in the personal presence of the Lord. The faithful human being who is who is desirous of being liberated from the clutches of material existence can very easily take advantage of the Bhagavad Gita, and with this in view, the Lord instructed Arjuna as if Arjuna were in need of it. In the Bhagavad Gita, 5 important factors of knowledge have been delineated pertaining to 1, the Supreme Lord, 2, the living being, 3, nature, 4, time and space, and 5, the process of activity. Of these, the Supreme Lord and the living being are qualitatively one. The difference between the two has been analyzed as the difference between the whole and the part and parcel. Nature is inert matter displaying the interaction of 3 different modes, and eternal time and unlimited space are considered to be beyond the existence of the material nature. Activities of the living being are different varieties of aptitudes which can entrap or liberate the living being within and without material nature. The point that I was making, which Giriraj Swami and others noticed, when Prabhupada came back to India, successful, bringing his American and European disciples, those same people that Prabhupada was preaching to in the 1950s and the first part of the 1960s, what the speaker prior to that, even in the 1940s, they immediately, and that's how the Krishna consciousness movement spread very powerfully and quickly in India, because Prabhupada had laid the seeds through his many decades of preaching in his native country. So what might not seem successful in the beginning, because we sincerely worked very hard for it, miraculous things are sure to come. We do the functional activity, which we can, so to speak, perceive something happen, like, okay, how many people came to the program? Did they hear about it by the Harinam? Okay, that we can take a statistic. But Krishna, from his side, he can move mountains, to quote the Bible. He can do things that are beyond our perception. Prabhupada himself describing himself, now I can see it's a miracle. One old man with barely enough money to purchase eatables, starting a worldwide God-conscious society, now I see it's a miracle, Krishna's miracle. All these subject matters are concisely discussed in the Bhagavad Gita, and later the subject matters are elaborated in the Srimad Bhagavatam for further enlightenment. Of the five subjects, the Supreme Lord, the living entity, nature, and time and space are eternal, but the living entity, nature, and time are under the direction of the Supreme Lord, who is absolute and completely independent of any other control. The Supreme Lord is the supreme controller. The material activity of the living being is beginningless, but it can be rectified by transferal into the spiritual quality. Thus, it can cease its material qualitative reactions. Both the Lord and the living entity are cognizant, and both have the sense of identification of being conscious as a living force. But the living being under the condition of material nature, called Mahatattva, misidentifies himself as being different from the Lord. The whole scheme of Vedic wisdom is targeted to the aim of eradicating such a misconception and thus liberating the living being from the illusion of material identification. When such an illusion is eradicated by knowledge and renunciation, the living beings are responsible actors and enjoyers also. The sense of enjoyment in the Lord is real, but such a sense in the living being is a sort of wishful desire only. This difference in consciousness is the distinction of the two identities, namely the Lord and the living being. Otherwise, there is no difference between the Lord and the living being. The living being is therefore eternally one and different simultaneously. The whole instruction of the Bhagavad Gita stands on this principle. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord and the living beings are both described as Sanatan, or eternal, and the Lord's abode far beyond the material sky is also described as Sanatan. The living being is invited to live in the Sanatan existence of the Lord, and the process which can help a living being to approach the Lord's abode, where the liberated activity of the soul is exhibited, is called Sanatan Dharma. One cannot, however, reach the eternal abode of the Lord without being free from the misconception of material identification, and the Bhagavad Gita gives us the clue how to achieve this stage of perfection. The process of being liberated from the misconception of material identification is called in different stages: fruitive activity, empiric philosophy, and devotional service, up to transcendental realization. Such transcendental realization is made possible by dovetailing all the above items in relation with the Lord. Prescribed duties of the human being, as directed in the Vedas, can gradually purify the sinful mind of the conditioned soul and raise him to the stage of knowledge. The purified stage of acquiring knowledge becomes the basis of devotional service to the Lord. As long as one is engaged in researching the solution of the problems of life, his knowledge is called jnana, or purified knowledge. But on realizing the actual solution of life, one becomes situated in the devotional service of the Lord. The Bhagavad Gita begins with the problems of life by discriminating the soul from the elements of matter, and proves by all reason and argument that the soul is indestructible in all circumstances, and that the outer covering of matter, the body and the mind, change for another term of material existence which is full of miseries. The Bhagavad Gita is therefore meant for terminating all different types of miseries, and Arjuna took shelter of this great knowledge which had been imparted to him during the Kurukshetra battle. Sutta Goswami said, thus being deeply absorbed in thinking of the instructions of the Lord, which were imparted, here we are, in the great intimacy of friendship, and in thinking of his lotus feet, Arjuna's mind became pacified and free from all material contamination. Arjuna's constant remembrance of the lotus feet of the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna, rapidly increased his devotion, and as a result, all the trash in his thoughts subsided. Because of the Lord's pastimes and activities, and because of his absence, it appeared that Arjuna forgot the instructions left by the personality of Godhead, but factually, this was not the case, and again, he became Lord of his senses. Sarupa Prabhu was mentioning in the class that he gave on Sunday that we fill our entire lifetime with devotional experiences and remembrances and relationships, and the sheer weight of all of that completely eclipses or outweighs any other remembrances or activities that we performed outside of Krishna consciousness. Because of his possessing the spiritual assets, the doubts of duality were completely cut off. Thus, he was freed from the three modes of material nature and placed in transcendence. There was no longer any chance of his becoming entangled in birth and death, for he was freed from material form. Upon hearing of the Lord Krishna's returning to his abode, and upon understanding the end of the Yadu dynasty's earthly manifestation, Maharaj Yudhishthir decided to go back home, back to Godhead. No. 3 years after the departure of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada was weighing very heavily in his thoughts. My spiritual master instructed me to preach Krishna consciousness in English. Abai began to think seriously about writing Vaishnav literature. His spiritual master had seemed very pleased and had told the editor of The Harmonist, whatever he writes, publish it. Business profits, if he could somehow expand them, could go for printing books in English. It was in 1939 that Abai wrote Introduction to Gita Upanishad. It was a short piece, but it signaled his intention to take on the task of one day translating Bhagavad Gita into English with commentary. Of course, there was already many commentaries in English, but most of them had been written by impersonalists or others who had not delivered the original spirit of the Bhagavad Gita, the spirit of Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, hearing Bhagavad Gita directly from Lord Krishna. Abai knew, however, that he could present Bhagavad Gita in the proper spirit by writing an English commentary based on the teachings of Lord Chaitanya and the disciplic succession. So he began. Whenever he could make time, he would write. Although a strict grammarian could find fault in his English composition, his meaning was always clear. So this is 1939. We're reading in the Prashadam time, Message of Godhead, which was written some at least 5 or 6 years later. And we see how wonderful and masterful Srila Prabhupada's English was and how uniquely expressive it is. In his introduction, Abai reflected on the time when, as a young schoolboy, he had attended a lecture, Vidya Ratna, the Jewel of Education. The theme of the lecture had been that God does not exist and could not exist. If there were God, he could certainly have appeared on earth to put an end to all religious rivalry. But since God had not obliged man in this way, we should banish all thought of his existence from our minds. The audience, Abai explained, consisted only of so many young boys, did not delve deeply into the subject matter of the lecture, yet the majority, impressed by the arguments, carried away lofty ideas of godlessness and thus became agnostics at home. Abai had not been satisfied with the agnostic conclusion because I have been trained by my father to be engaged in the worship of Sri Sri Radha Govinda. Srila Prabhupada's worshipful deities from the beginning of his life were and are Sri Sri Radha Govinda. It was very special that Prabhupada, in his own words, made it clear that New York was most dear to him. And as he said to Pancharatna, when Pancharatna was trying to more or less put words in Srila Prabhupada's mouth, Mayapur is your most important project. And he said, no, New York is my most important project. He named the deities here Sri Sri Radha Govinda. After obtaining them in Jaipur, the original place where Srila Rupa Goswami's Radha Govinda are situated. And it's also interesting to note that Srila Prabhupada, as he said, my hometown, Calcutta, he named the deities there also, Radha Govinda. But as a result of the Vidyaratna lecture, I was experiencing some mental conflict between agnosticism and the existence of Godhead. Later, having heard from his spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Abai understood that the personality of Godhead exists in every sphere of activity. But we do not have the eyes to see him, Abai wrote. Even if the Lord personally manifests himself on earth, the quarreling mundaners will not stop their fighting and look upon Godhead or his representative due to ignorance. This is the birthright of the individual soul by the grace of God. Bhagavad Gita is the true jewel of education. And in the Gita, Lord Krishna declares to the fighting people on earth, here I am, do not quarrel. The agnostic who had spoken of the jewel of education had been blinded by the jewel and therefore could not see and appreciate the personality of Godhead. Thus he had gone on to convince others to become so-called jewels also. This is in the chapter, The War. The chapter, An Unknown Friend, which describes Prabhupada's trying to communicate to Mahatma Gandhi in the latter stages of his life. This is after Indian independence, that he should give up politics and just simply take the devotional service and preach the actual pure tenets of Bhagavad Gita, of whom Mahatma Gandhi exposed or espoused that he was a follower of the teachings of Bhagavad Gita. We even have on the back of our Bhagavad Gita that we publish, when doubts haunt me and stare me in the face, when I don't see one ray of hope on the horizon, I turn to the Bhagavad Gita to comfort me. Those who read the Bhagavad Gita will derive fresh joy and new meaning from it daily. While on a business in Madurai in South India, I believe the date of this is 1948, some 9 years later, Abai showed some of his writings to, Mathuswami Chetty, another medical salesman. Mr. Chetty was impressed and felt he could persuade his wealthy friend, Dr. Alagappa, the famous Birla of the South, to finance the printing. So he was interested and he said, yes, submit the manuscript. But then the worst thing happened. The manuscript was stolen. It was the only copy, the one Abai was keeping safely at home. So if your home is not a home with devotees, it's not a safe place. That's described in graphic detail in the chapter, The Forest of Material Enjoyment, in the 5th canto. For further enlightenment, you can refer to that. So you want to keep something safely at home. You think it's safe there. The manuscript was stolen. He questioned his family and servants. No one knew what had happened, or no one was willing to disclose the truth. Abai was baffled. So much work had been undone. He felt he had worked so many months for nothing. Although he couldn't prove anything, he suspected that his servant or even his son might have done it with a motive for raising money, but it remained a mystery. And of course, what ultimately caused Srila Prabhupada to leave home for good one day, Srila Prabhupada's wife made a great mistake. There was a system of barter in which a customer would place on a scale an object the shopkeeper considered valuable, and the shopkeeper would then balance it with an equal amount of merchandise. In this case, it was tea biscuits. So while Abai was out, his wife took his worshipful Bhagavatam to the market and traded it for tea biscuits. When Abai came home and looked for the book, she told him what had happened. She didn't take the matter at all seriously. She was out of tea biscuits. But Abai was shocked. At first he felt depressed, but then a wave of absolute resolution passed over him. His family life was finished. Prabhupada. Before leaving my family, I wanted to get all my sons and daughters married, but some of them disagreed. But then the time is up. Never mind whether they are married or not. Let them see to their own business. Suppose I die immediately. Who will take care of my daughter? At that time, we say God will take care. Then why not now? God will take care. My Guru Maharaj used to say that renunciation of family life was civil suicide. If you commit suicide, that is criminal. But that renunciation of family is voluntarily committing suicide. Now I am dead. Whatever you like, you do. His spiritual emotions were so turbulent that he wasn't thinking of going to Jhansi. This was in the period when he was trying to establish the League of Devotees, which was the model for what ultimately became ISKCON some 13 years later. So he wanted to take a train anywhere. Thus, he remembered some old Godbrother friends were living in an ashram in a place called Jaragram, only a short train ride south of Calcutta. So he borrowed 10 rupees from a friend and went there. And Prabhupada just simply chanted japa continuously just to get his bearings. So whenever something is very heavy, we should take shelter of just continuous chanting of Hare Krishna. So when Srila Prabhupada, we mentioned it, if you read this, where is it? Here it is. Free to preach. You can actually, the windows to this apartment can still be seen. Columbus Avenue and West 72nd Street. One of Dr. Mishra's students had donated a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and Prabhupada recorded some of his solitary bhajans, which he sang to his own accompaniment of hand cymbals. He also recorded a long philosophical essay, Introduction to Gita Upanishad. Even if no one attends, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had told him, you can go on chanting to the four walls. But since he was now free to speak his message in the new situation the Lord had provided, he decided to lecture 3 evenings a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, to whoever would come. And Prabhupada's main preaching or giving class, speaking to people, was from Bhagavad Gita. So then when Srila Prabhupada established ISKCON, he had disciples, and there was Allen Ginsberg, who was a very famous writer and poet. He asked him, see if your publisher would publish my Bhagavad Gita. Everyone refused. But here, the Lord incarnates himself as the deity, as the holy name, as the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. So the holy name had was chanted in public, and different movers and shakers of the hip beat scene in New York City took notice of it, and ultimately news came to a record producer named what was his name? Alan Coleman. Let's make a record at the Adelphi Studios on West 46th Street, Times Square, just a short distance or even a stone's throw from where we do the Harinam for the Rath Yatra and other permanent events through the summer. And Prabhupada, he walked around Times Square. Actually, not just that night. He said, sometimes I couldn't sleep at night. I would come to Times Square and just walk around and look at all the lights in the buildings. So that record became a huge hit. It was advertised everywhere. send $3 plus 50 cents for shipping. So the letters would come in, and the record was big business. It was one of the main kind of sources of income, at the time. Prabhupada stayed continuously in New York City from October 1965 till January 1967. So what is that? 15 months. Then he went to San Francisco for 3 months, and then he came back on the 9th of April, where he remained here until the end of May. So it was during this period that this letter came in the mail, and Brahmananda, who was the temple president and would collect the mail from his temple president office, which was the front window of 26 Second Avenue, where you take your shoes off to come in the storefront. Said, this is a letter from Macmillan wanting a copy of the record. So Macmillan, they're international book publishing company. Went up to Srila Prabhupada. What should we were like children. We didn't know. And Prabhupada had to tell us everything. And Prabhupada thought, you go there and you hand deliver the record to the person, and you say you have a Bhagavad Gita that you want to publish. And Brahmananda was incredulous. He tried everything. He even went to the library, reading books, how to publish a book. It's just like, it's like what kind of like non-devotee publisher? It's all Krishna consciousness. There's no flowery language and annotations and footnotes and all kinds of speculation. It's all Krishna. Yeah. Said, well, should I bring the manuscript? No. Should I bring some of your books should I tell them? No. You just go there and tell them that you have a Bhagavad Gita that you want to publish. Okay. So he puts on a suit and tie and he goes up to Macmillan. This is like by Grand Central, in the 50th Street and like 3rd Avenue, Upper East Side, not Midtown East Side. And he finds out that the person who wanted the record was just an accountant, just counting numbers, had nothing to do with decisions in publishing. And it was interested. It was a young fellow, and Brahmananda's like, oh, but what is this? And he's trying, like you're preaching to somebody, but at the same time, you're like, got something heavy on your mind, you're distracted, but you're going through the motions. And then all of a sudden, this, definitely very important person comes in, and the accountant just kind of snaps to attention, and he's like at a loss because maybe he's like busted. What is he doing? He's supposed to be working, and he's like doing something else. He goes, and he says to Mr. Bruce Scharf, this is James Wade. He's our senior editor deciding publishing. And like Brahmananda, as if possessed by Prabhupada Shakti, going beyond his incredulousness and his like disbelief and lack of faith, he's like shaking Mr. Wade's hand and looking him directly right in the eye and goes, I have a Bhagavad Gita that I want to publish. And Mr. Wade goes, really? A Bhagavad Gita? Complete? Yes. Brahmananda's going. It's written by a Swami? Yes. Right here in New York? Yes. We'll publish it. Right there. And he was like, and Brahmananda was just he just flew back down got back on the 6th train and went all the way down to Astor Place and came back to the temple, and he's telling Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was like not at all emotional, didn't become all jubilant, and his Brahmananda, he expected it. So the holy name gave rise for the emergence of the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you very much. I would like to conclude. I would like to beg everyone's indulgence for a minute, or maybe even less than that. Let's see if the technology works. This is Prabhupada. This is a little extra, a little unrelated, but it's very, very nice and actually very funny. This is Prabhupada describing how he got a telephone in 26 Second Avenue and how it illustrates how we think that we're going to be happy by material advancement, but it causes disturbance. So let's see if I have it all queued up. Let's see if it'll work this way.
So, we are advancing in science, but at the same time, so-called science, at the same time, we are creating many disadvantages. Many disadvantages. From practical experience, I say that when I came to your country, in India, it is very difficult to get a telephone. You have to wait in the waiting list at least for 2 years, or you have to bribe the authorities, say 5,000, 2,000. Like. When I got this facility of telephone, because as soon as I deposited $40, the next day the telephone was in my room. So I was very glad. But after getting my telephone, I was disturbed always. Some of my students asking, calling me, green, and Swamiji, how are you feeling? At 12 o'clock at night. So I asked him, it is the time to inquire. I am very sorry. Not only one, I become so much disturbed. Then I asked them, get out this telephone. Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Bhagavad Gita Advente ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Govinda ki jai. Gaur Premanandi Haribo. Ask not for who the bell tolls for thee. Cling, cling.